They said the dead can't reach the living, but when the box in my lap started shaking at my husband's funeral, I stopped believing that. The church was full that morning. St. Paul's Chapel smelled of lilies and camera flashes. Reporters lined the back pews because everyone loved Richard Lane, the philanthropist, the hero, the man who gave $35 million to charity. Everyone but me. I sat alone in the front row clutching a tissue until it tore. My sons Daniel and Patrick whispered to each other near the lawyer. They didn't look at me, didn't ask if I was okay. I was the forgotten part of their father's perfect story. When the service ended, Mr. Keller, the family lawyer, stepped to the altar and cleared his throat. By Mr. Lane's request, he said his will shall be read immediately. People leaned forward. I held my breath. To my beloved wife, Margaret Keller read, "I leave this small box." The room fell silent. Then Daniel let out a short laugh. "A box," he said. "Maybe it's his ashes." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable as he handed me a palm-sized metal box, rusted, dented, and freezing cold. "That's it?" I asked, voice trembling. "That's what he wanted," Keller replied softly. No one offered condolences. They just watched me, the widow who got a relic instead of riches. I held the box tightly as people filed out. The sunlight from the stained glass fell across it, revealing faint scratches, ML. My initials, something twisted in my chest. Richard never did anything sentimental, not once in 40 years of marriage. Outside, microphones were waiting. "Mrs. Lane, how do you feel about your husband's $35 million donation?" I said nothing. I couldn't tell them that every dollar he'd given away was built on my sacrifices, on my silence, my lost career, my youth. Back home, the mansion felt like a museum. His awards lined every wall, smiling down at me like ghosts. I set the box on the kitchen counter next to the cold mug he'd left the morning he died. Hours passed. I just stared. There was no lock, no hinge, just rust and time. Then click. A vibration ran through the counter. The box moved. It trembled softly at first, then stronger, like something alive inside it. My phone rang. No caller ID. I answered. A man's voice, low, rough, and hauntingly familiar, whispered, "Don't open it, Margaret." Not yet. The line went dead. The box stopped shaking, but a faint red light blinked through a slit I swear hadn't been there before. I stood frozen, heart pounding, staring at it until sunrise. Was my husband reaching out from the grave, or had someone else just taken control of his last secret? People used to call me Mrs. Richard Lane like it was a badge of honor. Now, after the funeral, it sounded more like a punchline. For 40 years, I'd been the quiet shadow beside a man who loved cameras more than conversations. I met Richard when I was 24, teaching art at a community college in Maine. He was charming then, broke but full of wild ideas about changing the world. He said he loved how I saw beauty in broken things. Funny, isn't it? He ended up breaking me instead. We started with nothing, an old trailer by the coast nights, eating canned soup mornings, painting signs for his first business. When his company took off, so did his ego. Success turned him into a brand, and I became part of the background decor, the dutiful wife with a polite smile at every fundraiser. "Margaret, dear, remember to stand slightly behind me," he used to whisper before photo ops. "It looks better that way." So I did, for years. When the cameras stopped flashing, he barely saw me. Our house in Boston was full of staff guests and assistants who treated me like a piece of old furniture. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop like they'd forgotten I still existed. Even our children learned to treat me like an inconvenience. Daniel, the oldest, was his father's copy, ambitious, cruel, and always chasing applause. Patrick followed whatever Daniel said. And Lily, sweet Lily, moved away to California years ago. "Mom, she told me once over the phone, Dad says you don't understand business. Maybe you should let him handle everything." After that, she stopped calling. I kept busy with small things, gardening, cooking, pretending the silence didn't echo through the hallways. Richard started hosting galas for charity, standing on stage, talking about giving back. I used to watch from the side, wondering how much of his generosity came from guilt. I found out later, after his death, that none of his donations had my name attached. Every award, every speech, it was all about him. 2 weeks before he died, he came home from the hospital pale and weak. I tried to feed him soup, but he pushed it away. "You always make it too salty," he muttered. I wanted to say, "You used to love it that way," but the words stuck in my throat. That night, he sat at his desk writing something. His breathing was shallow, but his hand was steady. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Tidying up loose ends. Don't worry about it." Those were his last words to me. When the heart attack came, I was in the garden. The paramedics said it was fast, merciful even. But there was nothing merciful about what came next. At the will reading, when I heard about the $35 million donation and the rusty box, the world tilted. I'd spent decades sacrificing everything, my job, my dreams, my friends, so he could build his empire. And in the end, my reward was a piece of metal and a crowd laughing at me. That night, I opened a bottle of white wine and sat in the kitchen staring at the dark windows. The reflection that stared back didn't look like me anymore. Gray hair, hollow eyes, the same sweater I'd worn for 3 winters straight. I whispered, "What did I ever do to deserve this?" No one answered. I tried to call Daniel. He declined. Then Patrick. Straight to voicemail. Finally, I left a message. "This isn't about the money. It's about respect. I deserve at least that much." But deep down, I knew they didn't care. To them, their father's money was the only thing that mattered. The next morning, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside was a single line typed neatly on plain paper. Everything he gave away wasn't his to give. No signature. I read it 3 times, heart pounding. Who would send that? For the first time in years, I felt something other than sadness, suspicion. Maybe Richard hadn't been the saint everyone believed. Maybe that rusted box wasn't an insult, but a message. I looked toward the kitchen counter where it sat motionless, now silent and dull under the morning light. Something told me that box hadn't finished speaking, and maybe neither had he. The next few days after the funeral felt like walking through fog. Everywhere I turned, someone reminded me how lucky I was to have been married to a man like Richard Lane. $35 million to charity, the news anchor said on TV, smiling. A man of true generosity. I turned off the television before she could finish. Generosity, I thought bitterly, has a strange way of skipping the people closest to you. The mansion, once loud with guests and staff, felt like a museum now, too clean, too quiet, too cold. His portrait still hung in the foyer, Richard, with that perfect half smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. I used to love that picture. Now I couldn't look at it without feeling sick. By the 3rd day, Daniel showed up not to comfort me, but to collect documents. He didn't even knock. He just walked in wearing a designer coat and sunglasses, talking into his phone. "Yeah," the lawyer said, "we can start transferring the charity assets next week," he said, pacing through the living room. "Don't worry, I'll handle Mom. Handle me," as if I were a problem to be solved. When he finally hung up, he gave me a smile so fake it hurt. "Mom, you should be proud. Dad's legacy is everywhere. Hospitals, schools, orphan funds." "Legacy," I repeated. He left his wife with nothing but a box, Daniel. He shrugged. "You don't need money. The house is paid for." "No, Daniel. He paid for it. It's not mine anymore." His jaw tightened. "Then sell it. Move somewhere smaller. You never understood what Dad was trying to do." I stared at him, speechless. This was the same boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard when he was 5, calling them gold flowers. Now he spoke to me like I was some obstacle between him and his next check. Before leaving, he tossed something onto the counter, a glossy magazine featuring Richard on the cover. The man who gave everything. Everything but his family, I thought. That night, I tried to eat but couldn't. My appetite had disappeared, replaced by an ache that spread through my chest like poison. On the 4th day, Patrick came. He was the quieter one, softer-spoken, the kind you think still has a heart. I was wrong. He sat down across from me, sighing heavily. "Mom, I know this is hard, but you have to accept it. Dad's choice was noble." "Noble," I snapped. "Leaving his wife penniless is noble now." He shifted uncomfortably. "The donation helps people, Mom. You always told us to be kind." "I didn't say be kind by forgetting your own blood," I said, voice rising. Your father made his empire because I was the one keeping it from falling apart. Patrick looked away. You sound bitter. I am bitter. He stood muttering something under his breath and left without hugging me. The sound of the door closing was louder than thunder. For the rest of the week, no one called. Not Daniel, not Patrick, not even Lily, who hadn't shown up at all. I was invisible, erased from the story of the man I had built my life around. Then came Sunday morning. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the overgrown garden, when I noticed a black car parked across the street. A man in a suit sat inside pretending to read a newspaper. He'd been there for over an hour. When I stood to look closer, the car engine started and it drove off. It wasn't until later, when I checked the mail, that I found a small envelope tucked between bills. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed Richard in his office standing beside a safe I didn't recognize. On the back of the photo, a single sentence. He didn't trust them either. I felt the blood drain from my face. Them, my children, his company, the charity board. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed the rusted box, and held it close. The metal was icy again, as if it knew I was about to ask the wrong question. Richard, I whispered. What have you done? The air in the room seemed heavier. Then for just a second, I heard a faint hum coming from inside the box. Not as loud as before, just enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. It was alive again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, turning that box over in my hands, tracing the faint letters of my initials. Somewhere between the rust and the silence, I started to realize something terrible. Maybe my husband hadn't abandoned me. Maybe he'd left me a trail, and if that was true, then the box wasn't punishment. It was a test. That night, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like it belonged to him, to his voice, his rules, his shadow. The only sound was the slow tick of the grandfather clock and the wind brushing against the tall windows. Somewhere in that silence, the box waited on the kitchen counter, small and ordinary, until it wasn't. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face on the magazine cover, the man who gave everything. I whispered to the empty room except to me. At 2:17 a.m., a sound broke the silence, soft metallic, almost like a heartbeat. I froze. The noise was coming from the kitchen. Barefoot, I walked down the hallway past the portraits of our family, smiles frozen in time, all lies. The air grew colder with every step. When I reached the kitchen, the box was vibrating again faintly, like something trapped inside was trying to get out. I grabbed a towel, afraid to touch it directly, and slid it closer. The metal was still freezing cold. Then the humming stopped. A single click echoed, and a corner of the box lifted slightly, revealing a thin line of light. Inside, something glimmered. I leaned closer. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Inside was a small silver USB drive and a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. My hand shook as I unfolded the paper. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten in Richard's sharp, deliberate script. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. The truth isn't in the will, Margaret. It's in the past. Go back to where we began. Take the key. At the bottom of the note tape neatly was a small brass key with the number 17 etched into it. I read it twice, my breath catching on every word. Go back to where we began. Where we began. Maine, the little cottage by the coast, the one we sold after his first big deal. It had been decades, but I could still picture the chipped blue door and the smell of salt in the air. I set the note down, staring at the key. Why would he want me to go there now? Why, after giving everything away? Suddenly, a loud knock shattered the quiet. I jumped, nearly dropping the USB. The clock read 2:41 a.m. Who could possibly be at my door at that hour? I hesitated, peeking through the curtain. No one. Only the long driveway and the dim glow of the street lamp. Then I saw it, a black envelope lying on the doormat. No address, no postage. Just my name, M. Lane, written in block letters. I opened the door, heart racing, and picked it up. Inside was a photograph, old grainy, taken years ago. It showed Richard standing outside that same cottage in Maine, smiling at someone just outside the frame. On the back, a message scrawled in red ink. He wasn't alone that day. I stared at it, my hands trembling. The date printed in the corner was 3 weeks before he died. The box, the key, the letter, all of it swirled together in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. Was Richard trying to tell me something or warn me I plugged the USB into my laptop? The screen flickered, then a folder popped up. Private do not share. Inside, only one video file named 17.mp4. I hesitated, then clicked. At first, the video showed nothing but static. Then a frame appeared, a shaky recording of Richard sitting at his desk, pale and thin, looking straight into the camera. "Margaret," he said softly, "if you're watching this, you're in danger. Don't trust." The screen went black. I rewound, tried again. The same thing, the message cut off mid-sentence. But this time, before it froze, I caught something in the reflection behind him. A man standing in the doorway. I couldn't see his face, only his silhouette, tall, broad shoulders, standing too still. The video ended abruptly. My laptop went dark. The lights in the kitchen flickered once, twice, then steadied. For a full minute, I didn't move. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I felt watched, not by ghosts, but by something real. I picked up the brass key again, turning it over. 17. Somewhere out there, maybe that key opened more than a door. Maybe it opened the truth. I looked at the photo, the red letters, the faint outline of that cottage I hadn't seen in 40 years. If he'd hidden something there, I had to know what. I packed a small bag before sunrise, flashlight, coat, and the box. The road to Maine was long, but so was the list of lies Richard had left behind. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered to the empty house, "If you wanted me to find you, Richard, I'm coming." By the time the sun came up, I was already halfway down the highway, the rusted box strapped into the passenger seat like a sleeping animal. The GPS said 8 hours to the coast of Maine, but the road felt longer, like I was driving through 40 years of memories I'd spent my life trying to forget. The world outside blurred by Red Barn's gas stations, the smell of rain and coffee. Every few miles, I caught myself glancing at the box, half expecting it to start moving again. It stayed still, but somehow I could feel it watching me. I stopped for gas at a diner in New Hampshire. The waitress, a woman about my age, smiled politely. "Road trip?" she asked, pouring me a refill. "Something like that," I said. "Going home. Good reason or bad one?" I hesitated. "I guess I'll find out." She nodded, sliding the check toward me. "Well, sweetie, whatever's waiting for you, face it head on. Don't blink first." That stuck with me. By late afternoon, I reached the small town of Bar Harbor, the place where Richard and I first lived when we were still poor, still real. The cottage was a few miles out near the cliffs at the end of a gravel road most tourists never used. The air smelled like seaweed and pine. The waves crashed in the distance, the same rhythm I'd fallen asleep to as a young bride. But when I turned down the old road, something felt off. The mailbox still had Lane painted on it, faded and chipped. The front gate was chained shut, but the padlock looked new. Someone had been here recently. I parked the car, grabbed the box and my flashlight, and climbed over the gate. The ground was soft with moss and fallen needles. The cottage came into view, a small, weather-beaten house with peeling white paint and a collapsed porch step. I fumbled for the brass key. Number 17. My hand shook as I slid it into the front door lock. It turned perfectly. The smell hit me first, dust, salt, and something else, like old metal. Inside, everything was exactly as we'd left it decades ago. The wooden table, the broken clock, the faded curtains fluttering with the wind. It was like time had stopped the day we left. I placed the box on the table right where it used to sit when we ate breakfast together. Then I heard footsteps. Not from outside, from upstairs. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. "Hello," I called. No answer. The boards creaked again, slow, deliberate. Someone was there. I reached for the old fire poker near the fireplace, gripping it like a weapon. Step by step, I climbed the staircase. Every squeak echoed like a scream. When I reached the top, the door to our old bedroom was slightly open. Light leaked through the crack. I pushed it gently. The room was empty, but the window was open, curtains blowing wildly. On the bed lay a single object, a manila envelope. My name was written on it in red ink. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a stack of documents, old contracts, bank transfers, and photos. The top photo showed Richard standing beside a man I'd never seen before, gray-haired, tall in a dark suit. The date on the photo, the day before he died. A note paperclipped to it read, "He's not who you think he is." Before I could process it, a voice from behind startled me. "You shouldn't be here, Mrs. Lane." I spun around. A man stood in the hallway, maybe in his 60s, wearing a beige trench coat and holding a briefcase. His eyes were sharp, but not threatening. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Name's Thomas Gray," he said calmly. "I worked for your husband, or rather with him, before he disappeared." "Disappeared," I echoed. "He's dead." Thomas sighed. That's what they wanted everyone to believe. My grip on the poker loosened. "You're lying." He shook his head slowly. Richard knew his company was being used for something illegal, money funneled through fake charities. He planned to expose them, but someone got to him first. I stepped back, heart pounding. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you're not safe," he said. "That box you're carrying, he meant for you to finish what he couldn't." He opened his briefcase, revealing a thick folder marked confidential. Inside were files stamped with the company's logo and Richard's signature. I stared at them, stunned. "You're saying—" "He didn't just give it all away out of kindness." "No," Thomas said. "He hid the truth inside a lie. The charities were a front. But his personal account, 12 million untraceable, he left for you." My knees weakened. I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. "Why me?" I whispered. Because Thomas said softly, "You were the only person he trusted." Lightning flashed outside, followed by a roll of thunder that shook the glass panes. The lights flickered. Downstairs, a faint metallic hum began again the box. Thomas and I exchanged a glance. He whispered, "It's time." We hurried down the stairs. The box was vibrating on the table stronger than ever. The faint red light blinked faster like a heartbeat in panic. I reached for it, but Thomas stopped me. "Wait," he said. "It's a sensor. It reacts to certain words." "What words?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "The name of whoever's trying to open it." My throat tightened. "Then how do we stop it?" Before he could answer, the box clicked open. A burst of blue light filled the room. Inside wasn't money. It was a hard drive sealed in plastic labeled in Richard's handwriting, "Truth for Margaret only." The next morning, a storm rolled in from the ocean. The sky over Maine was dark and heavy, and the wind howled through the cracks in the cottage walls. Thomas stayed downstairs, hunched over the kitchen table, studying the hard drive we found inside the box. I stood by the window, watching the rain hit the sea. Every wave seemed to crash harder than the last. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of what I had learned. Richard hadn't been the saint everyone believed. He hadn't just given his fortune away for charity. He had hidden something so dangerous it could get us killed. Thomas connected the hard drive to his laptop. The screen flickered, loading an old video directory. Dozens of files appeared, all labeled in Richard's handwriting, "Donor Reports Project Haven Board Transfers," and one folder named Phoenix. Thomas clicked it. Inside were scanned letters, payment slips, and voice recordings. As he pressed play, I heard Richard's voice, steady, calm, secretive. "They're using the foundation to wash government contracts. Millions disappear each year, and they blame it on administrative losses. If anything happens to me, Margaret must find the truth. The key is under the floor." My breath caught. "Under the floor," Thomas paused the audio. "Do you know what he meant?" I looked down at the wooden planks beneath our feet. This cottage had always creaked when you walked across the center of the living room Richard used to joke that it was haunted. I knelt down, pressing my palm against the boards. The fourth plank from the fireplace felt looser than the others. "Help me," I said. We moved the table aside and pried the plank open with a crowbar Thomas found in the shed. Beneath it was a small, hollow space covered by a layer of dust and sea salt. Something metallic glinted inside. Thomas reached in carefully and pulled out a steel container wrapped in an old towel. He set it on the table and unrolled it. Inside were papers, photographs, and an old flash drive sealed in plastic. I flipped through the papers, bank records, offshore transfers, corporate emails. At the bottom, a list of names: Daniel Lane, Patrick Lane. My heart stopped. My son's Thomas scanned the pages, his expression darkening. They were involved. Look, these are their signatures. They approved multiple wire transfers to the same fake charity accounts. I shook my head in disbelief. No, they didn't know. They wouldn't. He handed me a printout. This one's dated a week before Richard's death. Daniel's authorization code. The room spun. I sat down hard on the chair. My own children, I whispered. He tried to expose them, didn't he? Thomas nodded slowly. He must have found out and realized he couldn't confront them directly. So he staged his death to protect you and to make sure the money didn't end up in their hands. I felt sick. Everything, the coldness, the sudden, the mysterious donation made terrible sense. They made him look like a saint, I said bitterly, because they needed him dead to stay clean. Thomas's voice softened. He left all this to you because you were the only person who wouldn't sell the truth. Lightning flashed, followed by a thunderclap that shook the walls. The power flickered and went out. We stood there in the dim light from the storm, surrounded by secrets that could destroy an empire and a family. Then from outside, a sound, a car engine. I peeked through the window. A black SUV was parked by the gate, headlights still on. 2 figures stepped out wearing dark coats and umbrellas. They found us. Thomas muttered. He grabbed the steel box and shoved it into his briefcase. We have to go now. But I couldn't move. My eyes stayed on that SUV. I recognized the man stepping out from the passenger side. Even through the rain, even after all these years, I knew that walk. Daniel, I whispered. Thomas froze. Your son. Yes, I said, heart pounding. And if he's here, then he knows. Daniel was talking to someone on the phone, gesturing toward the house. I saw his lips move. He wasn't smiling. Thomas grabbed my arm. Mrs. Lane, we need to leave. Now. I turned to the rusted box still sitting open on the table, its red light blinking faintly. The brass key that started it all lay beside it. I picked it up, pocketed the note, and whispered, "Not yet." The wind howled through the broken window as Daniel's car door slammed outside. I looked at Thomas. If my son had a hand in his father's death, I need to hear it from his mouth. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then get ready, because whoever's coming through that door isn't here to talk. The door rattled, once then burst open. Wind and rain rushed in scattering papers across the floor. Daniel stepped through, soaked to the bone, a black umbrella clutched in one hand, his phone in the other. Behind him stood another man, tall, built like a security guard, eyes cold and watchful. Mom Daniel said, voice tight, "What the hell are you doing here?" Thomas moved slightly in front of me, shielding the briefcase. "She's here because your father wanted her to be." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And who are you, Thomas Gray?" he replied evenly. "Your father's former legal advisor." Daniel gave a short, mocking laugh. "Figures. Every time Dad did something crazy, there was some advisor whispering in his ear." "Crazy," I said sharply. "Is that what you call leaving a message for me after his death, or hiding money in fake charities?" He froze. "What are you talking about?" "Stop lying," I snapped. "I saw the documents, the transfers, your signature." Daniel's expression hardened, the color draining from his face. "You shouldn't have come here, Mom." The man behind him stepped forward. I noticed the bulge under his jacket, a gun. Thomas tensed. "Tell your friend to wait outside Daniel. We can talk like family." "This is family," Daniel said quietly. "And family knows when to keep their mouths shut." The air in the room felt electric heavy. Outside, thunder rolled like the sound of a verdict being read. I stepped closer to my son, my voice shaking. "Your father trusted you. He believed you'd do better than him. But he found out, didn't he? He found out what you and the board were doing." He looked away. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." "So it's true," I whispered. "You used the foundation to steal. I used it to survive," he shouted suddenly, slamming his fist against the wall. "You think it's easy being his son, the perfect Richard Lane, the man who built an empire and reminded everyone that we'd never live up to him." The confession ripped through me like glass. "You killed him." His eyes widened. No, I didn't. But I didn't stop them either. The silence that followed was worse than the storm. I could hear the waves smashing against the rocks outside, each one sounding like a heartbeat I didn't want to count. Thomas spoke softly, carefully. "Who's them?" Daniel's throat tightened. "The board, the donors, the people behind Project Phoenix. They said Dad was going to expose everything. They couldn't let that happen. And they used you," Thomas said. "They needed a scapegoat." Daniel looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since the funeral. His voice cracked. "They said they'd leave you alone if I helped." My knees nearly gave out. Thomas caught my arm before I fell. "You thought protecting me meant betraying your father," I said. "You didn't save me, Daniel. You destroyed what was left of us." He clenched his jaw. "You don't understand. They would have killed him anyway. Then why stage the will I demanded? Why give everything to charity?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because that wasn't his will, Mom. It was mine." The room went still. Even the thunder seemed to pause. "What did you say?" He swallowed hard. "I rewrote it. I made it look like his last act was generosity, but it was never supposed to reach the charities. It was meant to keep the money hidden." Thomas stepped forward. "And you think they'll let you keep it now? They're already erasing you. Why do you think they sent someone to follow your mother?" Daniel turned sharply. "What I pointed at the window. There was a car watching my house, days before I came here." He blinked, realization dawning. "They must think you have the files." "We do," Thomas said grimly, patting the briefcase. Daniel's face went pale. "Then we're all dead." Lightning flashed again, lighting the room in white. The security man moved suddenly, reaching into his jacket. "Gun!" Thomas yelled, diving forward. The gunshot split the air. Glass shattered. I screamed. When the sound cleared, Thomas was on the floor, clutching his shoulder. The guard aimed again, but Daniel tackled him, the gun clattering across the floorboards. They struggled, grunting, hitting furniture, crashing into the table where the rusted box still sat open. I grabbed the poker again, the same one from the night before, and swung with everything I had. The guard went down hard. The gun skidded under the sofa. Daniel fell back, breathing hard, staring at the man unconscious on the floor. His face was streaked with rain and guilt. "Mom," he said, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I knelt beside Thomas, pressing my scarf to his wound. "We need to get him to a hospital." Thomas grabbed my wrist weakly. "No hospitals, no police, they'll find us. We have to finish this first. Finish what I asked." He pointed to the briefcase. "The files, the proof. We send them to the press, expose everyone. That's what Richard wanted." Daniel looked from me to Thomas, then to the box. "He left you the truth," he whispered. "And me, the guilt." I met his eyes. "Then help us make it right." Outside, sirens echoed faintly in the distance, or maybe it was just thunder again. I couldn't tell anymore. But I knew one thing: this storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. Rain hammered the cottage roof like fists on a coffin. Thomas was bleeding through the scarf, pale but conscious. Daniel stood by the window, breathing hard, scanning the cliff road for headlights. The unconscious guard lay sprawled near the fireplace. I had never seen my son look so terrified or so small. "Daniel," I said quietly, "they're coming back. We can't stay here." He turned toward me, eyes glassy. "There's nowhere left to go, Mom. These people, once they know we have the files, it's over." Thomas groaned softly. "Not if we move first." He gestured weakly toward the briefcase. "There's a contact inside, a journalist in Boston. She's been waiting for proof. We send her everything tonight." I knelt beside him. "You can't travel like this. You need a doctor." He gritted his teeth. "I need you to finish what your husband started." Those words hit me like lightning. For 40 years, I'd followed every rule Richard made. I'd been quiet, loyal, invisible. And now, when the world thought I was powerless, when even my own children had betrayed me, this was the moment I stopped being their shadow. I stood up. "We end this tonight." Daniel stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. "Mom, you don't understand how dangerous—" "Oh, I understand perfectly," I cut in. "Dangerous is being erased from your own life. Dangerous is letting other people decide your worth." He blinked, stunned into silence. I walked to the table, grabbed the steel container from under the floor, and dumped the contents onto the counter. The documents spilled out: contracts, ledgers, offshore accounts, evidence of everything they'd done. Thomas nodded. "There's a laptop in my bag. Upload the files. The hard drive in the box, too." Daniel hesitated. "If we leak this, they'll come after all of us." "They already have," I said. "It's time they see who they're dealing with." He opened the laptop, his fingers trembling as he worked. The glow from the screen cast sharp shadows across the walls. The hum of the storm mixed with the rapid clicking of keys. I pressed my palm against the rusted box, whispering to it as if Richard could hear me. "You wanted me to find the truth. Well, I found it." Then suddenly another car engine outside. Headlights swept across the window. Another SUV pulled up behind Daniel's. Doors slammed. More than one. Thomas's eyes went wide. They sent a cleanup team. Daniel cursed under his breath. "We're out of time." I grabbed the USB and slipped it into my pocket. "We need to get this evidence somewhere safe. There's a back path, Thomas said, leads to the cliffs. There's an old boathouse. Go now." Daniel helped him up, but Thomas shook his head. "No, I'll slow you down. You're not staying," I insisted. He gave me a sad, steady smile. "Someone has to buy you time." The pounding on the front door began a deep, deliberate rhythm. "Mrs. Lane," a man's voice called through the wood, calm and cold. "We just want to talk." "Yeah," Daniel muttered. "That's what they said to Dad, too." We slipped through the kitchen door as the front lock splintered. Rain lashed at our faces, the wind nearly tearing the briefcase from my hands. The path to the cliffs was slick with mud, the ocean roaring below like a living thing. Halfway down, Daniel grabbed my arm. "Wait, where's Thomas?" I turned back. The cottage windows were glowing flashes of light, shouting a gunshot. "Mom, he's—" I shook my head. "Keep moving." We reached the boathouse, a small wooden shed clinging to the rocks. Inside, everything smelled of salt and rust. There was an old rowboat half covered with a tarp and a radio on the wall. Daniel slammed the door shut and barred it with a plank. "We can't stay long." If they followed, but before he could finish, the radio crackled to life. "Margaret," a voice said softly. I froze. I knew that voice. "If you're hearing this, it means you found everything." It was Richard. "I couldn't tell you while I was alive. They were watching. They used our sons, our foundation, everything. But the real account, the one they'll never find, is in your name. Don't trust anyone, not even—" The message cut out static hissing through the room. Daniel stared at the radio, horrified. He recorded that I turned to him slowly, not just for me, for whoever survives this. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. Flashlights flickered through the cracks in the wood. Mom Daniel whispered, "They're here." I grabbed his face in both hands. "Listen to me. We don't run anymore. You help me send those files, or your father died for nothing." He nodded, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "Okay." We powered on the laptop again, connecting through Thomas's hotspot. The upload bar crawled across the screen, 10%, 26%, 51%. "Come on," I whispered. "Just a little more." The doorknob rattled. A man's voice shouted, "Open up, 68%, 74%. A gunshot shattered the window. Daniel ducked. I screamed. The laptop slid off the table but kept uploading, glowing in the dark like a dying candle. 92%, 99%. Sent. I grabbed the briefcase, yanked the hard drive free, and smashed the laptop with the poker. Sparks flew. The radio went dead. The door crashed open. Figures in dark coats poured in. Daniel lunged forward to block them, one last desperate act of redemption. I ran toward the back exit, clutching the rusted box to my chest as thunder roared above us. When I reached the cliff's edge, the wind nearly pushed me over. The sea was wild and endless, and below it somewhere I thought I heard Richard's voice again. "You were never weak, Margaret. You were the weapon." I looked down at the crashing waves, then back at the burning lights of the cottage behind me, and I jumped, cold. That's all I remember when I hit the water. the ocean swallowed me whole, black, roaring, endless. I kicked and gasped, the current dragging me down, pulling at my coat, the rusted box still clutched in my hands. I don't know how long I fought before I surfaced. The rain had stopped, replaced by fog thick enough to hide the cliffs. I floated toward a patch of light, the old buoy near the inlet, and managed to grab onto its frame, coughing, shaking half alive. The box was still there, pressed to my chest like a heartbeat. By dawn, I washed up on the rocky shore half a mile away. My clothes were soaked, my knees bleeding, but I was alive. Daniel, I didn't know. The image of him lunging at those men replayed over and over. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. I stumbled toward a small fishing cabin by the docks. The sign said closed for season, but the door was unlocked. Inside was a small stove, a cracked mirror, and a landline phone hanging on the wall. I stripped off my wet clothes, wrapped myself in an old blanket, and tried to think. The files were gone. The laptop destroyed, but the rusted box still hummed faintly when I touched it. Whatever was left inside, it wasn't finished. When I finally caught my breath, the phone rang. Once. Twice. I froze. No one should know I was there. I picked up. Hello, silence. Then Margaret. It was a man's voice. Familiar. Rough. Calm. You survived. My blood ran cold. Who is this? You already know. Richard. The pause on the other end was long enough to feel like a lifetime. You have to trust me, the voice said. They'll be looking for you. The moment that video went live, everything changed. I gripped the receiver, shaking. That's not possible. You're dead, not dead. Hidden. The people I was investigating thought they silenced me. They didn't. I stumbled back against the wall. My knees almost gave out. You faked your own death. I had no choice. They were closing in. If I'd stayed, they would have killed you too. My mind spun. You let me mourn you. You let our children bury you. I never wanted that, he said softly. But the files had to be safe. You were the only one I could trust. That's why I left you the box. I wanted to scream to curse him, but all that came out was a whisper. Daniel's dead. They killed him. Another silence. Then with something like regret, he made his choice. But there's still one son left. My breath caught. Patrick, he's in New York. He hasn't called me once. Patrick wasn't innocent either. He handled the money transfers. He's the reason the FBI's looking at me instead of them. The FBI, I repeated, stunned. They think I'm alive and dangerous, but they don't know the truth yet. You can still fix this, Margaret. You have the last piece. I looked down at the rusted box. You mean this? Yes. Inside, under the false panel. There's a memory chip with the real recordings, the ones that prove everything. Find Thomas if he's still alive. He'll know where to send them. He's dead, I said quietly. A heavy sigh came through the line. Then you'll have to do it alone. I could barely breathe. Why me, Richard? Why not anyone else? Because you were always stronger than you knew. Static crackled. The line began to fade. Margaret, listen, don't trust. The call cut off. The dial tone echoed in my ears like a scream. I stood there, the phone dangling from my hand, the sound of the sea just outside the walls. He was alive. After everything, after all the grief, the humiliation, the anger, he was still alive. And he'd left me holding the match that could burn his empire down. I sat by the stove, staring at the box. My fingers traced the rusted edges until I felt a small ridge underneath, almost invisible. I pried it open with a knife. A thin metallic plate lifted away, revealing a small black memory chip taped beneath it. There it was, the truth, the thing that could destroy everyone who had ever lied to me. I wrapped it in cloth and slid it into my pocket. Then I looked at the photo still tucked in the lid, the one of Richard smiling beside a woman I didn't know. Her face was blurred, but the handwriting on the back was clear for when she finds me. I stared at the words until the letters seemed to twist in the light. She, not you. A chill crawled up my spine. Who was she? Before I could think, the landline rang again. I hesitated this time. Every instinct screamed, don't pick up. But I did. Mrs. Lane, a new voice said, this is Agent Crow with the FBI. We need to talk about your husband. I clutched the phone tighter. "You're too late," I said. "He's already called." The line went dead again. Outside, a car engine started in the fog. Headlights cut across the window. I looked down at the chip in my hand, then at the photo, and whispered to the empty air, "Richard, what have you done to me now I didn't sleep that night?" The fog outside pressed against the windows like breath on glass, and every sound made me flinch: the waves, the creak of wood, the faint hum of the box. Richard was alive, or someone wanted me to believe he was. I replayed the call in my head until the words lost meaning. Find Thomas if he's still alive. But Thomas was gone. I'd seen him fall. I'd heard the gun. And then there was that photo, the one taped inside the box. Richard smiling beside a woman whose face I couldn't see, with the words scrawled on the back, "For when she finds me." Who was she? And more importantly, why did he look so happy? I stared at the picture until dawn, then decided sitting there like prey wasn't an option. I had to move. At first light, I left the cabin, the box tucked under my arm, and walked toward the nearest town Winterport population. Maybe 2,000, the kind of place where everyone knows who doesn't belong. The local diner was open. I walked in dripping fog and exhaustion and ordered coffee. The waitress looked at me like I'd crawled out of the sea. "Long night?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. I slid a few bills across the counter and asked if she knew anywhere with Wi-Fi. She pointed to a small motel across the street. Room 3 smelled like cigarettes and old rain. I plugged in Thomas's backup phone, the one I'd taken from the cottage, before I jumped. The SIM still worked. When I connected to the signal, one notification popped up. One new voicemail, unknown number. I pressed play. "Mrs. Lane, this is Agent Crow again. We believe your husband may have staged his death with the help of a woman named Evelyn Cross. We have evidence suggesting they were in contact up until the day of the funeral. Please call me back. Evelyn Cross." The name hit me like a cold slap. I hadn't heard it in 40 years. Evelyn was Richard's business partner in the early days, the brilliant accountant who helped him get started. Rumors said she'd been more than that. I'd dismissed them back then. Foolishly. Now staring at the blurred photo, I could almost see it, the hair, the smile. It was her. I opened the rusted box again, searching for anything I'd missed. Under the lining was a folded note written in that same sharp handwriting. "If she contacts you, don't believe her. She's working for them now." My pulse spiked. As if on cue, the motel phone rang. I froze, then answered. "Margaret," a woman's voice said. Smooth, calm, familiar. "It's been a long time." My mouth went dry. "Evelyn." "I was hoping we could talk in person. There's a lot you don't know." "You lied to him," I said. "You helped them fake his death." "No," she replied, her tone measured. "I saved him, and I'm trying to save you too." "Save me from what?" "From the people who want that chip in your pocket. They don't care about Richard anymore. They care about what he found." My fingers brushed against the memory chip hidden inside my jacket. "What's on it?" I demanded. "Proof of something bigger than both of us." Richard stumbled onto files that tie the Lane Foundation to government contracts worth billions. The charity wasn't just laundering money, it was building weapons. If that gets out, powerful people fall. "And what about him?" I asked. "Where is he?" A pause, then alive, but barely. "They'll kill him if you release those files." I laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that? After everything, you don't have to believe me. Just meet me. 10 tonight. Dock 9, Winterport Harbor. Come alone." The line went dead. I sat there gripping the receiver until my knuckles turned white. If this was a trap, I was walking straight into it. But if she was telling the truth, if Richard really was alive and being held, then I couldn't just ignore it. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I changed into dry clothes, tied my hair back, and packed what little I had, the box, the chip, and Thomas's revolver. At 9:45 p.m., the fog had rolled back in thick as smoke. The docks were empty except for the faint flicker of a single light near the end. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing on the wet planks. "Evelyn," I called out. A figure stepped from the shadows. She was older now, silver hair, long coat, the same calculating calm I remembered. "Margaret," she said softly. "You look exactly the same." I kept my hand near the gun. "Where is he?" She studied me, her eyes sharp and sad all at once, still protecting him even now. "Tell me where he is, Evelyn." "I can't," she said, "because if you find him, you'll die too." Before I could reply, a spotlight cut through the fog, a car pulling up at the end of the dock. Black SUV, doors opening. Evelyn's expression changed from calm to panic. "You weren't followed, were you?" I stepped back. "What did you do?" "Run, Margaret," she shouted. But it was too late. The men were already moving, dark suits, guns drawn, voices shouting over the wind. I turned and ran toward the far end of the dock. Behind me, someone fired. Wood splintered near my feet. The box slipped from my arm, clattering across the boards. One bullet hit the metal, squarely sparking. The red light inside flickered once, twice, and then started blinking again. Not fading this time. Counting down. The blinking light quickened, pulsing like a heartbeat on the edge of panic. Tick, tick, tick. The men shouted, the sea roared. Evelyn screamed my name, but all I could see was that box. For weeks it had followed me like a curse. Now under the fog and gunfire, it looked alive. "Margaret, run!" Evelyn yelled again, ducking behind a crate. Bullets hit the dock, splintering the wood around us. I dove for the box, snatched it up, and slid behind a piling. My fingers shook as I pried it open. The red light blinked faster, casting an eerie glow across my hands. Inside the hidden panel Richard mentioned had come loose. Beneath it, wires a small transmitter, and a glass capsule filled with a shimmering liquid. It wasn't a bomb. It was a data core. Thomas had once told me about technology like this, liquid data storage encrypted beyond recognition. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just money laundering. The Project Phoenix files Richard had uncovered weren't about funding corruption. They were about creating it. They weren't washing millions. They were building identities. Fake citizens, shadow accounts, digital ghosts for politicians, criminals, spies, anyone who could pay. And Richard had proof. Proof the Foundation's donors weren't saints or CEOs. They were global power brokers, the people who built wars, not hospitals. I pressed the capsule into the hollow of the box and whispered to myself, "He left me the world's dirtiest secret." Evelyn crawled beside me, breathless blood running down her arm. "You can't let them have it," she said. "If they get that capsule, they'll erase every trace of what he did." "I thought you worked for them," I snapped. "I did," she said softly, "until I realized Richard wasn't trying to expose them for glory. He was trying to save you. He gave them what they wanted, long enough to disappear." "Disappear," I said, almost laughing. "He let me bury him, Evelyn." Her eyes filled with something between guilt and pity. "He thought it was the only way to keep you alive." Another shot rang out. The dock shuddered. Evelyn screamed and fell back. "Go," she gasped. "They'll kill you for that box." I turned, sprinting down the pier, clutching it to my chest. The fog swallowed everything, the ocean, the lights, the sound of the men behind me. When I reached the end of the dock, there was nowhere left to run. The sea stretched black and bottomless. One of the men stepped out of the mist, gun raised. "Mrs. Lane," he said calmly. "Hand it over." His voice was smooth, professional, like a man used to ending things quietly. I looked down at the box, at the blinking light that now beat slower, steadier, like it was waiting for my choice. "Do you even know what's in here?" I asked. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. I smiled, a small, bitter smile that surprised even me. Then you'll never understand why he trusted me. And before he could move, I threw the box into the sea. It hit the surface with a splash and sank instantly, the red light fading into darkness. The man cursed, lowering his weapon. "You just destroyed everything." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I just buried the only part of him worth saving." He stepped forward, ready to strike, but sirens wailed in the distance. Flashing lights cut through the fog. Evelyn's voice behind me, weak but defiant. "FBI, drop it." The man froze, then ran. As agents swarmed the dock, I sank to my knees, shaking, soaked in rain and salt and grief. The truth was gone. The evidence lost. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid, because I finally understood what Richard had meant when he said I was stronger than I knew. He hadn't left me a fortune. He'd left me freedom. It was over, or so they said. The FBI agents wrapped me in a blanket, led me toward an ambulance, and asked the same questions again and again. Where did you get the box? Who contacted you? How long had you known your husband was alive? I didn't answer any of them. I just stared at the sea. The red light was gone now, swallowed by the black water, but I could still see it flashing behind my eyes. Evelyn was alive, though, barely. They put her on a stretcher oxygen mask covering her face. As they carried her past, she grabbed my wrist weakly and whispered, "You did the right thing." Then she was gone, swallowed by flashing lights and government men in dark suits. I sat in the back of the ambulance, silent, the smell of salt and gunpowder thick in the air. One of the younger agents, Crow, the one who'd called me earlier, handed me a thermos of coffee. "Mrs. Lane," he said gently, "we'll need a full statement. But for what it's worth, I think you saved lives tonight." I gave him a tired smile. If only that made me feel better. He hesitated. "We also confirmed something. About your husband." I turned my head. "What about him?" Crow took a deep breath. "The call you received, it was real. We traced it. But not from where we expected. It came from a secure bunker up the coast, 2 miles inland." My heart stopped. "You found him?" He nodded slowly. "Not exactly. The signal was automated, a timed transmission. Your husband recorded it weeks before he died." The words sank like stones. So he had died. He hadn't called me from beyond the grave, he'd planned it, timed it perfectly. Even his voice from the dead was just another message in a long chain of riddles. Crow must have seen my face. "He meant to protect you, ma'am." "I know," I said softly. "He just never realized he was the one I needed protection from." He looked down, unsure how to respond. I stared out the open ambulance doors at the coastline. The first pale light of morning broke through the fog. Seagulls wheeled overhead, calling to each other as if nothing had happened. For the first time in months, I felt empty. Not lost, just hollow, in a way that finally made sense. When they cleared me to leave, I didn't go back to Boston. I didn't call my surviving son Patrick. I didn't call anyone. I took a train north to a town called Camden, quiet, cold, anonymous. I rented a small house by the harbor and filled it with silence. I planted tomatoes in the window box. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was 24, and still believed love could fix people. Sometimes at night, I'd sit by the water with a cup of tea and think about Richard, about the man he was before ambition hollowed him out. I'd remember the smell of paint thinner on his hands, the way he used to hum off-key when he worked late. Maybe that's the version of him I buried that night. Not the liar, not the manipulator, just the man who once believed in good. Weeks passed. The world moved on. The headlines about the Lane Foundation scandal came and went. Names were redacted. Statements were made. No one ever mentioned mine, and I preferred it that way. I kept one thing from the wreckage, a small rusted hinge from the box, the only piece that washed ashore days later. I placed it on my desk beside a photo of a much younger me, smiling in front of the old cottage. Every time I looked at it, I remembered what Thomas told me before he died. Some truths aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be survived. Now that was my truth, too. I survived, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. 3 months later, peace became a stranger again. It happened on an ordinary morning, gray skies, the smell of coffee, the gentle hiss of the harbor wind through my window. I'd just finished watering the plants when I saw it, a plain brown envelope on my doorstep. No name, no return address. For a moment, I thought it was another bill, but when I picked it up, the weight inside felt too light for paper, like a secret waiting to breathe. I carried it to the table, hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. My hand froze. It was Richard, standing by the cliffs in Maine, the same cliffs where I jumped, the same night the FBI pulled me from the water, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Daniel, alive. They were shaking hands, smiling. The date printed on the corner was 2 weeks ago. My heart stopped. The room tilted. It couldn't be. Daniel was dead. I saw the blood, the gunfire, the chaos. I saw him fall. And Richard. The FBI had confirmed the transmission came from an automated line. So, how I flipped the photo over. On the back, in Richard's handwriting, were were 5 words that turned my blood to ice. The truth was never buried. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Outside, a car engine idled. Through the window, I saw the silhouette of a man watching the house from across the street. When I blinked, he was gone. I looked down at the photo again, the ink still fresh enough to smudge. Somewhere between disbelief and dread, a terrible realization crept in. Maybe the box wasn't the last message after all. Maybe it was only the beginning. I folded the photo, slipped it into my coat pocket, and whispered, "All right, Richard, one more game." The next morning, I packed a small bag, just clothes, my passport, and the photograph. I didn't leave a note. There was no one left to read it. The harbor was quiet as I walked toward the train station. A soft mist clung to the boats and gulls circled lazily above the water. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful for what I carried in my coat pocket. Every few steps, I touched the photo just to make sure it was still there. Richard and Daniel, alive, together, smiling like they hadn't destroyed everything they touched. The train to Boston left at dawn. I bought a one-way ticket. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there. Turn them in, demand answers, or just look them in the eye and ask why. As the train pulled away from the station, I stared out the window. The coastline blurred past gray sea, darker sky. My reflection stared back at me, older, sharper, quieter. A woman who'd lost everything but herself. Halfway through the ride, my phone buzzed. A text, unknown number, turn back, you're not ready for what you'll find. Then a second message, we're not your enemies, we're fixing what he broke. My heart pounded. We. I typed one word back, who? No response. Outside, the train entered a tunnel. The lights flickered, and for a brief second, I saw my reflection again. Only this time, there was another figure behind me. A man. I turned around. No one. Just an empty seat. When we emerged back into daylight, the phone buzzed again. One final text. Check the storage locker. Number 17. I froze. The number. The key from the box. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The sea stretched beside me, endless and indifferent. After a lifetime of lies, I had one truth left to face. I stood gripping my bag and whispered to myself, "All right, Richard, you win." But this time, I decide how it ends.